We would like to invite Dr. Renee back to the stage for a very, very quick conversation. Okay. We have prepared some questions for both Dr. Renee and Sister Genti. Okay, the first one is for both of you, please. If someone tells me that he wants to commit suicide, how should I respond? Dr. Renee?
So, suicide is actually considered a psychiatric emergency. So I always tell everybody, patients and the significant others of patients, that whenever somebody verbalizes the idea of suicide, we need to take it very seriously. So remember, I was talking about this treatment-resistant condition, as we considered it back then, specifically borderline personalities, who are prone to repeated suicidal attempts. In fact, some of them would verbalize it to just manipulate the significant others around them, but we should always take it seriously. And I always say that maybe the best way to go about it is to identify that person to whom the affected individual is open or receptive to, or at least the least resistant with, and let that person encourage the affected individual to, of course, seek professional help. Because we need to identify where the behavior is coming from. Because suicidality can be a manifestation of a lot of psychiatric disorders, most commonly depression. But it can also be brought about by other psychiatric conditions. Yeah.
Thank you. Sister Genti?
I've had to deal with people who felt very, very hopeless, and 3 specific situations that I've been involved with. When it's a person I don't know and I'm hearing about it, then I would definitely do as you suggested, that see if they can be open to taking professional help, because that's the right way. But in 3 specific cases where I knew the individual and where I was asked to intervene, or in 2 situations they contacted me directly, what I found was that I had to remind them of the good things that they had experienced in their life, but at that moment had forgotten. The darkness had overtaken them to such an extent that anything good had been left behind. And so highlighting the good things to them, reminding them of those good things, seemed to shift their focus, and I would then give them some homework. So maybe they weren't to the point where absolutely they were ready to finish everything, but maybe it was a cry for attention. But using that technique in each one of those cases certainly helped them out of that situation. And it wasn't just one conversation, it was several conversations over the space of a few days, and then bringing them back to some sort of normality, and then putting them in touch with others who could support them on a day-to-day basis. But I've seen how sometimes people get into such a state of desperation, they don't see any way out at all, and they think that this is going to be an escape, and of course it's not. But helping them see that they do have options, they do have choices, and there can be something good that's ahead for them in the future.
Thank you. Maybe related to that is, can someone who has been diagnosed with mental issues benefit from meditation? Dr. Renee?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned in my presentation, the ideal approach to almost all psychiatric disorders is a combination of medication and psychotherapy. Oh, you're referring to meditation? Is it meditation or medication? Meditation, yes, definitely. So, part of what I largely do in my psychiatric practice is psychotherapy. And the specific psychotherapeutic approach that I adopt is called CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, which is in relation to what Sister Jayanti was saying. The principle of CBT states that as we feel, so we think. So in other words, whatever it is we are feeling at a particular moment in time is related to what we are thinking. And one important thing that reinforces suicidality is thoughts of hopelessness. In fact, it's directly proportional. The more hopeless a person feels, the higher the suicidal thoughts may be. So part of what we do in therapy is to try to challenge thoughts. So that's the cognitive aspect. And under the behavioral aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy will fall meditation. So
Thank you. Sister Janti, you have anything to add to that?
I think that's fine.
Okay. Oh, back to Dr. Rene. Sir, statistics seem to show that cases of mental affliction in this country are on the rise. What would you think are the risks that Filipinos face today that are making them more vulnerable than before?
I say it's very multifactorial. So there are a lot of factors. An important factor, I think, that applies to the Philippines is the huge disproportion of mental health professionals to Filipinos who need mental health intervention. And thus, our advocacy and our work towards the passage of the mental health law. Specifically, it is estimated that the ratio of mental health professionals to Filipinos who need mental health intervention possibly is, imagine this, 3:100,000. So there are only 3 mental health professionals to address 100,000 individuals with possible mental health needs. So I think that's a very important factor. I think part of the reason why there's also an increasing prevalence in mental illness is or psychiatric conditions, which is, I would say, a good news, is because there's also better identification or recognition of it, as compared to in the previous times. Other non-favorable factors would include the increasing socioeconomic difficulties. There's differences in cultural and religious beliefs. And I think one thing that would specifically apply to our country, I don't know if you would agree, is the increasing divisiveness in politics. I think we have never been more divisive as we are now, at least as far as politics is concerned. So those are just a few practical ideas.
Okay, can government be counted upon to respond to this? Are there mechanisms in place right now?
Well, there's
It seems to be, you're talking of the private sector.
So there is the relatively recently passed mental health law, which was passed in 2017, but it was officially signed into a law last year. But of course, I think it's a big step because for the past several decades, I think 3 decades, Dr. June, if I'm not mistaken, we have been working towards the passage of this mental health law. And finally, it's here. But I think the next challenge will be the implementation of the law. So I think that's another entirely different ballgame. Yeah.
Thank you. Sister Janti, as Brahma Kumari's head delegate to the UN Conference for Climate Change since 2009, you have been sitting with world leaders trying to figure out solutions to climate change. How much hope remains for this planet?
Well, the good news is that the planet is eternal. The planet will survive. Now the question is, what's going to happen to human beings along the way? And what I mean by that is that, in fact, nature has its own mechanisms of renewal, and so nature will find ways to renew itself. But my hope is that human consciousness will change sufficiently to be able to impact climate also. In 2009, when we were first in Copenhagen, we took up this aspect of consciousness and climate change. And it was interesting that people would sort of raise their eyebrows, and then when we'd explain it, it's a very simple connection, a little bit alluding to what I said earlier, but it's that if my consciousness is gross and material, and my focus is acquisition and multiplication of physical assets, then I'm just a consumer, the caterpillar that you saw in the movie at the beginning. And it means that I'm just depleting nature of resources, and I'm going to be just exploiting nature, taking from nature. And this is the condition of the world at the present time. We're consuming 3 times the amount of the Earth's resources currently. If I can change my consciousness and come back to the awareness of my spiritual identity and find the treasures within, then I can simplify my life. I can change my diet, have a plant-based diet. I don't need to exploit nature or be aggressive or violent against nature. I can learn to live in harmony with nature. And you have the cure. And that's it. It sounds simple, and it actually is, but it needs a change of consciousness. And the good news is that 2 years ago, when we had the COP in Bonn, in Germany, UNESCO had as its stand, changing the theme on top of the stand, changing minds, not climate. And so the message of consciousness has got through.
Another question for Sister Genti, please. According to the 2019 Global Peace Index, the Philippines is the country that's most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Earlier this week, the Manila Observatory urged government to declare a climate emergency, actually. Where should we be focusing our energies as a people? How do we prepare mentally, emotionally, spiritually for what we now know as inevitable? Killer storms, killer floods, killer quakes.
The Philippines has historically experienced quite a bit. And I think it was during one of the COPs in Warsaw some years ago that you had the huge hurricane Hainan, and it was your negotiator, the government negotiator who was in Warsaw at that time, who made a very deeply moving, emotional speech at the plenary, at the opening plenary, just as the hurricane had hit and he started to get news of what was going on. And he led a huge campaign of fasting for the Philippines and fasting for victims of the hurricane. So it led to a big interfaith gathering, and the momentum for that lasted for several years, actually. So yes, the Philippines is absolutely in line for a huge amount of impact of climate change. And I'd say that change of consciousness on the part of each one and sharing that message. Can we reduce our needs? Can we simplify? Can we reuse? Can we recycle? But also, can we reform? Can we change our habits and create a different type of thinking and living? But the other thing is resilience, being able to develop resilience. And I think that's possible for everyone. And that means whatever happens, but if I've developed my own inner capacity of tolerance and cooperation, then I'm going to be able to spring back and have a life in which I can still enjoy human values and have a give and take of love and happiness with others around me. So resilience is absolutely vital. And there can be maybe other ways to develop resilience, but I know one way is definitely through meditation. You're developing your own inner capacity for patience, for tolerance, for decision making, and all the things that happen in an emergency. The first thing that goes when there's a disaster, and that is your phones go, the networks fall down. You won't be able to call your loved ones, you won't be able to phone somebody for seeking assistance or asking them if they need help. At that moment, you rely on your own inner connection with the one above to be able to give you guidance, to be able to know where to go, what to do, how to do. These are not theoretical things. I'm talking about people who've been through, whether it's terrorist acts like in the Twin Tower story, people who are meditating were able to lead others to safety. Long story, I've cut it down to one sentence, but literally they were able to lead 65 others to safety from the second tower because they knew from deep within their heart what it is they needed to do. And so resilience means to be able to have power, but also that connection with the divine. I think the second thing that's needed is very much the spirit of cooperation. It exists already within the Filipino community, I know that, but even more so where really we move away from competition and comparison and conflict to a state in which as one human family we're able to cooperate and support. Because today I need help and tomorrow you need help. And if we've been in that exchange of give and take, help will always be available. So I'd say that it's actually, I'll actually quote Christiana Figueres, who was the executive secretary, the former executive secretary who actually was the architect of the Paris Agreement in 2015. She shared a platform with us in London 2 weeks ago on the subject of spirituality and consciousness and the state of the world. So she said that maybe climate change is the best crisis that humans have brought on themselves. Why? Because maybe it's climate change that's making us come together as a human family to find ways in which to be able to deal with this.
Thank you. Would you say that is happening? Great, thank you. Dr. Rene, I have no idea how you are going to answer this in less than 1 hour, but how can you tell if a family member or a friend or anyone close to you or just in your immediate vicinity has mental issues and that the behavior they're exhibiting is not just a tantrum, plain rudeness, or plain slacking? And connected to that, what do you do if you suspect that you yourself need help? Yeah.
It's not the first time I've thought about that for myself. So, the thing is, there is no absolute way that we will know whether an individual has a formal psychiatric problem until that person undergoes proper clinical assessment. No, but I guess there are some practical ways to go about it. Like one thing that you may be on the lookout for is if there is an obvious change or an obvious departure from the usual behavior of the individual. Another practical thing is how consistent or how persistent is that change or departure, or that behavioral change, in other words. And one important thing we always try to look into when we're doing clinical assessment is how much has those changes, those behavioral changes, compromised the functionality of the individual. And when I say functionality, I'm talking about work, interpersonal relationships, whether in or outside of the home, the daily routine of the individual. So if there's a disruption in those practical aspects, then maybe, most probably, it would be prudent for the individual to try to go to seek professional help, which is in relation to your second question. If you feel that you yourself have some mental health issues that need attention, then I guess the most concrete and simplest way to go about it is to seek professional help. At the very least, undergo assessment. Because there are certain criteria that you need to be able to fulfill to say that you have a psychiatric disorder, or, for instance, depression.
One more question related to that. How much does psychiatric treatment cost? Are there structures in place for those who cannot afford it?
It's very varied. And yes, there are structures. There are actually, the tertiary hospitals, the bigger hospitals, usually they have departments or sections of psychiatry which offer services for free. For free, yes. So there are outpatient services. Yes, UPPGH, of course, Dr. June. There's UPPGH. Makati Med, I know for sure, offers free outpatient services. And we even allot a few beds for inpatient hospitalization, which is for free.
Sister Genti, the Philippines is one of the largest users of social media. And it goes beyond social, actually. It's the source of news for many people and a way to promote businesses. However, it also has become a tool to diminish others, destroy reputations, etc. How does this negativity that we are exposed to on a daily basis affect us spiritually?
Hugely, absolutely, in a huge way. On the other side, I also see how, because of social media, we're being heard and watched by many, many people who couldn't make it to be here. So I recognize absolutely the value of the communication tools that technology has given us, but in particular, I'm aware of the breakdown in human interaction, where I'm only interacting with a screen and thinking that I'm communicating with people. It's actually not true. I'm not communicating, I'm not interacting. And I know that sensible parents will limit screen time for their children. I'm not sure if they limit screen time for themselves, but I think they do it for the children at least. Spirituality means going on an inner journey and using your inner capacity in a way that's meaningful out there. And social media seems to take all our attention away out there. And so we have no more space and time to look within. And as you said, there's a huge amount of negativity that's coming to us from all these different directions. And so I have to choose, how am I going to use my time? My time is precious. My space in here is even more precious. And so what am I occupying my inner space with? What sort of information is it that's useful for me to keep in here? And if the last thing I do is watch videos that have violence, and most things seem to have a lot of violence, if the last thing I'm reading is about negativity, what's going to be the quality of my rest time? What's going to be the consciousness with which I awaken next morning? And so I think that spirituality says, take charge of yourself. Don't allow yourself just simply to be swept away by the tide. Make a conscious choice about what is beneficial for you and your family, and what is it that's going to be adulterating your consciousness and bringing it down to a lower frequency. The aim is to create a higher and higher frequency so that you're able to be happy, productive, and creative. And so if you're going the other direction, there's something wrong. And so spirituality says, take responsibility and make a choice.
On the other hand, Sister Genti, we also see on social media a lot of messages that say something like, I am praying for you, I am with you in spirit, I'm sending you healing thoughts. Is it really possible to empower someone from a distance? And how does that work?
Vibrations can travel through space and time. And so yes, if I'm remembering somebody with thoughts of prayer in God's remembrance, then those thoughts of love and the power of God's love is a healing power, and that definitely works. I remember there was an experiment done in the USA where they had a group of people who were being prayed for, and another group of people, patients, who were not being prayed for. No surprise, the people who were receiving prayers got better quickly. The people who weren't receiving prayers complained. And so the group decided to pray for them also. But it's true that our vibrations reach out, our thoughts and feelings reach out. This for me is evidence of the power of meditation, that yes, meditation can heal. Our thoughts of love can reach others and help them.
Thank you, Sister Genti. Now, could you give us any last words on the subject? Silent mind, happy heart. Dr. Rene?
Maybe just something short and sweet, which is just try meditation. And instead of being heavily medicated, let us be heavily meditated.
Mr. Genti?
Well, that was perfect. But yes, I would like to say that just remember who you truly are. You're the creation of the divine, and so you carry the highest qualities within yourself. So when you look into the mirror tonight, before you go to bed, when you brush your teeth, tell yourself you love yourself. And that's going to take you a long way in the right direction, and also it'll teach you how to love everybody else around you.
Well, thank you both, Dr. Rene and Sister Genti, for an evening of thoroughly insightful exchanges.